All right, aloha everyone. We are on class 7 tonight, 7 out of 10. So we're definitely getting close, and we're talking about the processing of wet seeded crops tonight. And so what that foreshadows is that all of us are starting to see plants that are going to seed, producing a fruit, getting us closer and closer to processing our seed. And I do want to just take a moment to go over what's to come. After harvesting and processing wet seeded crops tonight, we are jumping in next week to breeding and selection priorities for Hawaii, which will help you guys in the selection process as far as the plants you're going to be saving from in terms of like the roguing process and the selection process of the fruits will help on that. And we're also going to be looking at the next class, which will be seed storage, seed lots, and germination testing. We're going to jump into. And so that's like basically like we have our seed, and now we're making sure that it's good seed, it's well stored, it's well dried by us before we would be sending it into the lab or storing it on our own farm, one or the other. And then the final class, we're going to jump into stuff just related to connecting deeper with the Hawaii Seed Growers Network and selling seed through it, and maybe some additional things that we're, kind of still designing that based on our collective needs and what we just determined would be the most useful, best way to use our time there. And yeah, but tonight we're talking about wet seeded crops. And obviously, we're focusing on the tomatoes because that's what we're growing, but I'll also touch base on a lot of the other crops that we're working with. As far as, gardeners here in Hawaii, a lot of the vegetable crops that we're working with that are wet seeded, such as like eggplant or squash or cucumbers, things like that, we'll touch on. And then we'll jump into just Q&A. And so, I think you guys have been primed on this, but if you have any questions, you can definitely add them to the chat. We should have plenty of time for a Q&A today, a little bit of extra time, and that can, yeah, support any questions that you guys might have or things that you need a little bit more information on or more support on. So yeah, so if you haven't already, take the time to think of some questions and add them to the chat or add them in during the Q&A itself. And I'm just touching in on, oh yeah, and then also just to share that, just an invitation to add into the chat where your plants are at, as far as the crops that we're growing for this cohort. If you're seeing lots of beans, if you're seeing lots of tomatoes coming or tomato flowers, or your lettuce is starting to bolt, your Ethiopian kale is bolting, wherever it's at with it, let us know. Yeah, just curious because not everyone's using the Padlet, and so it allows us all just to kind of touch in and see where we are at as a collective. I'm also really always curious to know where everyone's growing because that will obviously make a difference. If you're at higher elevation, a colder climate, I would expect things to be a bit slower. If you're lower, things to be more rapid in growth and quicker to bolt or quicker to produce flowers of things. And so you're also welcome to add that information in as well. And going to jump to slideshow. Marielle, if you can put that on for me, that would be wonderful. All right, so just touching in on the tomatoes, the large red cherry, following the crop. These pictures I showed about 4 weeks ago to you guys. So this was on the left, what my tomato plants looked like 4 weeks ago. And the left one was before pruning, the right one was after pruning. And these are all about, maybe 2 feet tall at that point. And next slide. And just some slides in terms of what's to come, because the cherry tomato, the large red cherry tomato can become really unruly. It can be just like a wild bush that can just take over land, get really wide, take over space, and that's fine if that's the style that you want to grow it with. For myself, focusing on production, but also focusing on ease of harvest, a larger quantity. We are looking at consolidating the plant to a trellis, which for us is the fence trellis that you can see in the picture, the upper picture and the lower picture here. The lower picture, it's on the left that we're looking at the cherry tomatoes, and we're vining it up into the trellis. We've gone over plenty, that like couple feet off the ground, get the vine going, then start allowing some split of the vine itself and some bushiness of the plant. Doing this to manage late blight as a big thing, but then also, yeah, just funguses in general and pushing that energy upward where the new flowers are going to happen anyway. And so you can see in the upper picture is kind of a better one where you have that stem, and then you have these, bunches of tomatoes coming out, and then the bushiness consolidated up top. We use on the farm, we're using little clips. We have these little biodegradable plastic clips that we use to attach the tomato to the tomato vine to the trellis. And so, we're still pruning them. We're still actively pruning them, even at this point, which is maybe, 2.5 months in or so. We're starting to get tomatoes growing. I think we've actually had two tomatoes turn red on the plant, but what we mostly have is green bunches or bunches of green tomatoes, green cherry tomatoes. And probably we just did our last prune this week. And next slide. And so yeah, so this is a left and right, two different photos, kind of hard to tell, but what you can see is that like consolidation on the trellis itself. So this is like the next pruning in a way, and the final pruning that really connects these to the trellis before we just kind of let them get big and bushy. And eventually they'll probably get about 2 feet on each side of the trellis wide, so about 4 feet wide it'll be, and it'll kind of drop down, drip down a little bit. But it allows us to walk our pathways and harvest and have an easier time finding the tomatoes. You can choose to just keep pruning, keep continuously pruning. For us, we end up with, hundreds of feet of tomatoes. And so we abandon the pruning after about a few months and just harvest. Next slide. And these are the tomatoes today on the right. It was yesterday on the left. So we came in and did another pruning, so it got big and bushy, as you can see on the left, and that bushiness kind of sagged down all the way to the ground. We came in, pruned it back. We have one made lead, splits into two. That split is probably like 2.5 feet off the ground. And then maybe once we get up to about 3 feet is where we start letting it split even more. And so really like there's no leaves the bottom 3+ feet from the ground. Eventually some of the branches will flop down as we let them go wild, but for the most part it's nice and clean in that lower few feet of the crop. And you can see on the right, you can see maybe if you zoom in a little bit better too, depending on how big your screen is, but some bunches of tomatoes there. So they're coming. I see where might one find the biodegradable clips. These came from Farmer's Friend. I don't know if they still. Actually, I'm not sure if they came from Farmer's Friend. I think it was Farmer's Friend, but it might have also been Johnny's. Yeah, so I don't know. And I don't know the quantity they sell them in, but maybe if you did an internet search, you'd find them. There are a lot of ones out there that are just plastic ones. Personally, I don't like it because they all end up breaking, just being in the sunshine. Like they're not going to last more than one, maybe two cycles of a crop. And then also it becomes a challenge when it comes time to take the tomato plants off of the trellis if we're trying to segregate the plastic clip from the compost pile. And then inevitably some of those plastic clips will end up in the compost pile, which is not what we want. And so I think so as much as possible, try to minimize the use of plastic on our farm. Next slide. So getting into wet seeded crops, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. And this is a listing of some crops, some wet seeded crops we may be working with here in Hawaii or in our gardens: tomatoes, eggplant, cucumber, papaya, squash, different kinds of peppers, and poha berry. And they all have similar quantities, which is basically a wet, gelatinous, pulpy mass around seeds. And our job is to segregate the seed from the pulp and then dry it out. And so that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. There are other crops, obviously, that we could be working with. One example is the abundance of tropical fruits that we have in Hawaii. And just want to mention them because it is something that we don't do a lot of through the Hawaii Seed Growers Network. It's something that we could open up into. That is a possibility. I will say one challenge though is that the fruit seeds, the bigger seeds, don't store well. Meaning if you dry them down to an appropriate level of humidity, it probably will make the seed non-viable for a lot of these bigger seeds. Maybe this is a durian seed or a cherimoya or Rollinia, things like that that have a lot of moisture content in the seeds. They're kind of best gone from fruit to the ground and yeah, don't have as good of a track record being stored. And so we're not working with those a lot. But there are some seeds, maybe like Lilikoi, that is a small seed that can be dried down and stored pretty well. Papayas, obviously, I have on this list. Same thing. I know papayas are one that if I throw them in my worm bin, which I don't because of this, but they will always sprout up, meaning that like I could put them in my worm bin and like 6 months later I could use that worm castings on in a starter mix and I'm gonna get volunteer papayas. So that's something I keep out of my worm bin for that. But yeah, it just shows the stay power of these seeds and their resiliency to survive. And yeah, and where we're going with these seeds is, like, or what we're talking about now is basically like saving seed for the sake of banking them either, to be sent out through the YC Growers Network or for us to have for our next season of growing or to share with people over the coming months. And so these pictures of seeds, we have tomatoes on the left and cucumbers on the right, are really examples of like that dryness quality that we want, the seed that's going to be in a packet and you can run it through your fingers and play with it. And each seed's kind of individuated and separate and fairly dry. Next slide. So wisdom of age is what we're looking for when we're harvesting plants or harvesting fruits off of the vine or off of the plant itself. And so what that means is that a lot of the foods that you might see in the grocery store, as an example, don't necessarily have a seed. Some of them might have a seed that's viable. A lot of them won't have a seed that's viable, such as a cucumber. You can see the picture of like a pickling cucumber and a salad cucumber that's still green, which means that the seed's still going to be green. It's going to be a soft seed. It's going to be a small seed. It doesn't actually have the capability to reproduce yet. The plant doesn't have or the fruit doesn't have the capability to have produced a seed that can reproduce. It needs to get a little bit woody, a little bit hard. There are certain things in the grocery store, maybe like a tomato that's going to be red, and it could produce a viable seed, but it's not necessarily going to be the best viable seed because most tomatoes that we see in the grocery store were harvested green and then maybe ripened with ethylene gases on the way across the ocean or something like that. Then there's other things like eggplant you can see in the top right. It's yellow, like a yellowish brown. That might have been a purple eggplant to start. And then what we're looking for is that like really mature, over mature. And I say wisdom of age because by then, not only is the fruit ready to uh, biologically produced a seed that is viable for reproduction, but it also has a genetic coding that honors like the full life cycle of the plant. And I say honors it, meaning that the genetic qualities of it will understand more of the full seasonal cycle. It'll understand more of the full cycle of nutrients in the soil and the full cycle of pests that it had to deal with over the course of its life. And really will use epigenetics over the course of its life to activate different genetics that are stored in the plant and make it more adaptable in our local conditions. And so that maturity is really important. You can see at the bottom right, we have a kabocha. Not all kabochas will blush out, meaning they won't all have like an orangish yellow to them. Most of them a little bit will have a color change at the maturity of their life. And even what they found actually, it says years ago, I meant to find it before this class, but I haven't yet, is that they found that with squash, which would be true with most crops then, is that when they harvest the crop straight off the vine of a pumpkin, let's say, and harvest the seeds and test the genetics of that and its adaptability versus take it off the vine and put it on a counter for 2, 3 months, that the genetics are going to be markedly different. And there'll be more active, more genetics activated in the one that sat on the counter for a long time, which will definitely help with storage. And I know, for most of us, we might have a season that we're growing pumpkins at this point, or kabocha type things. And so having that storability is kind of really important. And so if we do put something on the counter for a few months and it stays good, then it's getting that coating, that capability for longevity in that way. And then on the left, we have the cherry tomatoes you guys can see, and you can see varying levels from green to like orange to red to like very red. And what we're going for is the very red. And so, sometimes I might do a few passes over the course of maybe like 5 days to harvest the cherry tomatoes and pick the really red ones, as red as I can get them off the vine. And then even after that, I might let them sit for a little bit. Definitely like the one, actually, if I'm doing it over the course of 5 days, and the ones that I pick on the first day, I'm waiting to get them all at once so that I can process them all at once. And yeah, and so that really red on the vine means that like it survived on the vine to that like full pop it in your mouth ripeness, sweetness, without having pest pressure or challenges on there, or splitting, things like that. And so the longer it can be on the vine, the better. Then taking it off, and can it sit for a little bit, because then it gets the storage quality. Actually, can it sit out of the refrigerator on your counter for a period of time? And I know that we do a CSA on the farm, and have about 30 families pick up a week, and sometimes families can't make it, and so we throw their bags in the fridge. And I always feel bad throwing their carton of cherry tomatoes in the fridge, because I know they're not going to be anywhere near as good as they are if they were kept at room temperature once they go overnight in the fridge. And so what we're looking for is a cherry tomato that can sit out on the counter and still be good, 5, 7 days later. And so if we do that, and maybe some don't make it, some get a little bit mushy, they get a little extra soft, or maybe they split, or have a pest get to them, or whatever it is. Those are ones that like I'm also happy to rogue out in favor of the ones that stayed really good quality on the counter. And this is when we have, a large quantity of things. And most of us, if we're looking at 5 plants of large red cherry tomatoes, you guys should have plenty of tomatoes that you can, really take your time roguing with them and get this wisdom of age, as I call it. Next slide. So removing seed from cavity, from the cavity of the fruit, which is, pretty straightforward. Mostly it's using a spoon for some of these bigger crops, such as you can see the squash top left, cucumbers bottom left. Cucumbers have a little bit of juice with them, so they can go in a little bit of a bowl. And on the bottom right, you see the eggplant. And top right, we have the tomatoes. Tomatoes, I'm mostly with the cherries doing what is shown in this picture, which is squeezing them. Big tomatoes you might cut open and scoop out the inside, but the cherry tomatoes, I'm just using my hand. I'll show a video a little bit later of what I do with the cherries, but I'm mostly just squeezing them out, juice and all, into a bowl. The eggplant, just to mention it, in the resources folder, there is a wet seeded crop sheet from CTAR, from the College of Tropical Ag, on processing eggplant. And one thing I've never done, but I just happened to look at that today, but what it talks about in this article is actually cutting up the fruit itself and putting it in a jar and letting a fermentation process happen, so that you can actually just kind of like scoop out the seeds, separate it so it gets all mushy inside, because eggplant has a tendency to be really firm. And so, what it's showing in this picture, it looks a little bit mushy, but it usually takes some good use of our wrist to like scoop out those seeds from the inside of the eggplants. And then we got to figure out how to separate the pulp from the seed itself, which I'll talk about a little later. But yeah, but the fermentation process on the eggplant can help mushify the fruit. Next slide. And yeah, so this is that a little bit later on the eggplant. So also, one thing I've done in the past is use a food processor. You can also use a blender for that pulp of the eggplant. Just throw it in with a little bit of water, make it nice and moist, and use it at low speeds, so you don't end up nicking or cutting the fruit itself, or the seed itself. But if you do it at really low speeds, generally it's not going to hurt It's not going to hurt the seed. I do Lilikoi the same way. I'll throw Lilikoi in my Vitamix with a whole bunch of water, turn it on a real slow speed, and then can pour off the top. And same with this eggplant seed, you can pour off the top. And with the Lilikoi, it's really nice because you can still use the pulp of the fruit and make a nice Lilikoi juice and harvest the seed at the same time. Next slide. Then we get into straining seeds. So for most of these, process is pretty simple. Like cucumber, throw it in a colander, blast it with water. Pumpkin seed, same thing. Throw it in a colander, blast it with water, pick out the big chunks, the big pieces. If you want to, you can get, use the screens that we talked about, like the high mowing screens. That have all different mesh sizes that can help divide if you have an exceptional large amount of pulp that doesn't, just go through these little strainers, you can do that. But for the most part, you're going to get 90 something percent of the fruit out of there just by blasting with water through a colander. You can for things like the eggplant, you can see on the left side, but you can do this for all of these. You can put them in a bucket, make sure it's like mashed up really well, and put the seed in there, and you can actually massage the seed inside the bucket so that the fruit pulp separates from the seed really well. And then you can, like the top left picture, pour off the top because a lot of that pulp is just going to float up. There's going to be seeds that float up as well. You can generally count on that the seeds floating aren't mature enough to sprout. So most of them are going to be non-viable, or they're going to be young and undesirable, one or the other. And the good seed is going to be really dense and it's going to sink down, similar to, when we're winnowing seed. When we're winnowing seed, we could have that seed in a bowl with a whole bunch of the particulate matter and just kind of massage it and play with it, and the seed's going to sink down, the chaff's going to rise up to the top, and then we can kind of pull the chaff off with relative ease. And so, the bottom left picture shows eggplant seed after you've poured that material off. And then from there, I could take that and then put it in a colander and blast it with water and clean it up even more. Next slide. All right, so this is a video of cleaning tomato seed. This is, I will warn you, it's a recycled video, so it's a little bit older, but we're gonna walk through it. And Mario, you can hit play. And you want your volume up, but I guess it already is, if you're hearing me. And this is an example of wet seed cleaning. Tomatoes, I'm choosing tomatoes because tomatoes are a little bit unique in that they have a gelatinous coating over them that actually has in it a chemical compound that prevents the seed from sprouting. And with that in mind, we need to actually remove that coating for the longevity of the seed, particularly for seed storage. If you're going to plant it right away, you can plant it right away. See, probably if you're gardening already and you grow tomatoes, you're used to seeing a lot of volunteer tomato plants popping up from the seed. Even our worm bin, is one of the places that we don't put tomatoes because they don't digest the seeds, and then we end up using it and the seeds sprout up. But what it needs is a fermentation process to remove that gelatinous coating. And so I'm going to come in here and just take the seed, and I'm just going to squeeze it. Into this container. And this is a cherry tomato. I'm actually not sure we're not really going to save this seed for the network, but I'm not sure what variety this is, but we grow about 6 varieties of tomatoes, heirloom tomatoes, that are on the seed network. And they're all cherries. We grow cherries because they don't have the same pests as the larger tomatoes, which is really nice. And we grow them in the field. And these varieties we've been stewarding for the past, say 10 years or so, 12 years that I've been growing these varieties year after year. And they've generally done really well for us, which is really nice. We started with maybe 12 varieties of heirlooms and whittled it down to the ones that really wanted to grow where we are. So it's a little bit of a messy, slimy process. And if you're working with things like cucumber, whoa, or eggplant, or peppers, or really anything, you want to make sure that the fruit's nice and mature before you harvest it. So you can see these tomatoes are nice and red. You know, we want that like bright red. We don't want anything immature. It's kind of the wisdom of age. You know, as things age, they get more and more wisdom in there in their DNA, and we want that wisdom of anything that it gleans for its evolutionary cycle in the soil. Shooting myself up the nose with tomato seed. And with cucumbers, you know what it looks like when a cucumber's ready, it's going to be yellow. And when an eggplant's ready, it's going to start turning like a brownish yellow. Most varieties, depending on the color of the variety. Peppers, just in their most mature state, is when we want to harvest the seed. So a lot of these things, it's past the time of them being able to eat, or us being able to eat them. They're going to be a little bit bitter, even for us to eat. The cherry tomatoes, these are prime for eating at this phase. But for a lot of those other seed crops, all we're doing is we're cutting them in half, and we're removing the seed. You know, usually with a spoon, removing the seed, maybe giving it a rinse to clean off any extra debris, and putting it through a colander. You know, putting it on a colander and rinsing it off. And then usually I'll use screens, just like our seed saving screens right here. I'll just spread the seed on the screen and let it dry out. You know, put it in a place out of the sunshine, but where there's kind of good airflow to happen, because you don't want it to mold. I'll usually come in every day and just spread it around, move it around, just so that it can dry out nice and even. But you get the picture on this tomato seed. I'm going to keep going on this and finish this batch. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a cloth and I'm going to cover it. So what that'll look like. Is just putting, you know, a little towel over it, a rubber band here, so that I have airflow, because the airflow is important. And but what I don't want, so I don't want to suffocate it, but I also don't want to let flies in. And the reason I want the airflow is because what I'm doing is I'm culturing a fungus and bacteria on here that will remove that seed coat. So after I leave this for a few days, we'll revisit it, we'll come back. Once it has a little bit of a coat of fungus that I can see on the top, I'm going to take that, put it in a colander, pour it into the colander, blast it out with the hose, really clean the seed, spread the seed out on the screen, and let it dry. And then it will be ready for storage to get dried down a little bit further in our lab, and then stored until people are ready to plant it. So thanks. All right, here we are back. It's 2.5 days later, and we have our tomatoes that have been sitting out fermenting. So we can come take a look at what it looks like on the inside of here. And you can see that there's a good bit of fungus on there. It's molded. Usually I'd probably wait another 12 hours or so. But for the sake of demonstration, we'll just continue on. In that next 12 hours, probably what would happen is that fuzz would spread over the entire top of the tomatoes. And I have a trusty colander here, just a little colander from the kitchen. It says Tommy 2 on it, which is the variety of tomatoes that we're cleaning right now. And so, coming on in, and I'm gonna pour the tomatoes onto the strainer. I'm gonna look in there, see if I got all the seed. I can see there's a little bit of seed left in there. And so I'll spray it out just to get most of the seeds. And you can already see that the seeds look different than the tomato seeds that we eat because they don't have that gelatinous coating. And so that's already come off of the seed. I can just spray it down in the colander. Get it nice and clean. You can see there's a little beetle there or something that I could get out of there. And that looks like a layer of fungus. I got them nice and clean. I'm gonna work that beetle out of there. And then I have the seed on the colander and I can just spread it out. And I can even let it dry on the colander. I can use a cloth on the back side to get some of that moisture out of there initially. But what I'll do is I'll just spread it out. It could be on a bigger screen if we have more tomato seed, like our seed cleaning screens. Spread it out, keep it in a nice, cool, dry place out of the sun. And I could even come in tomorrow and spread the seed around a little bit. So just keep mixing it up so that it evenly dries all around. And I'll probably wait for about, I don't know, 5 to 7 days or so to let it dry down before sending it into the lab, where they'll dry it down even more. So that is seed cleaning basics. All right, next slide. And this is an example of wet seed cleaning. Tomatoes, I'm choosing tomatoes because tomatoes are a little bit
Ariel,
unique.
can you go to the next slide?
Sorry, hang on. I'm having a little
Okay.
trouble.
Oh, good.
Just
Take your
keeps
time.
replaying. Oh, there we go.
All right. Yeah, so this is that, life cycle that we just went through, which is basically the nice ripe tomatoes been sitting out, squeeze out all the insides, um, have, that liquid, which is the liquid of the tomato mixed with the seed itself. If there's not enough liquid, that it's like really like juicy, then you can add some water. But ideally, you're doing a big enough amount that you're going to have that juiciness that when you like move around your container, it's going to like swish around. And then there's the mold growing on top of the tomatoes that you can see in the bottom right, and that is pretty well established. You don't want to you don't want to leave it too long. So generally, it's like 2 to 3 days in most of our climates. For some, it might be a little earlier. For some, it might be a little bit later if you're in a cool, dry climate. But you just need, barely a layer of mold over the seeds for this to work. And if you go too long, you can actually negatively impact the seed. You can cause it to rot, which is not what we're going for here, or even it can cause it to sprout during that time while it's in there. And just a note on that gelatinous coating that I didn't mention is that gelatinous coating actually has in it an inhibitor to sprouting. Um, Meaning, and what that's there for genetically for the sake of the tomato is because the tomato is so juicy on the inside that it's kind of an invitation for that seed to sprout inside the tomato. And so that gelatinous coating has a substance in it or some chemical substance that prevents it from sprouting inside the tomatoes so that when we get tomatoes, we're not just getting sprouted tomatoes. It doesn't do it for us, it actually does it for its own survival because then when a bird comes and eats it, then that seed can be inside the bird's belly. Then it's going to ferment. Then that gelatinous coating is going to break down, and 2 miles away, that bird's going to poop out that seed, and that tomato is going to grow. So it allows it to propagate itself into the world. And, and in a natural setting, if the tomato doesn't get harvested, it's going to drop to the ground. It's going to ferment. That's going to take the coating off, and then it's going to sprout. Tomatoes are also something that if I were to end up putting in my worm bin, which I don't, similar to papaya for, the next year, all my worm castings will just be sprouting tomatoes in my wherever I'm using the compost. And we use our worm castings for our potting soil mixes. And so what I don't want is to be seeding specific varieties of tomatoes and have other varieties of tomatoes be sprouting up in there. Next slide. This is a video too that you can hit play on. Short one. And this is just showing that same process of just poured that liquid mixture onto the screen and blasting it out. You can see 90 something% of what's ever in there is going to come out. You can see a little black thing on that screen, but otherwise, we're getting clean seed at that point. And as Marielle mentioned in the comments too, just the importance of using that towel on the underside to dry it, because what I would probably do with this screen right now is use this screen to end up drying the seed on as well. And so by continuously running that towel on the bottom, I'm going to get whatever moisture's on that screen off of there and just create a drier environment for it. And I talked about mixing it up every day, like mixing the seed up. It does a couple things. One is it just allows anywhere that there's maybe a cluster of seeds or a clump of seeds to break up so that any moistures that's between that clump of seeds can have a chance to evaporate quickly as well. And it also prevents seeds from sticking together. Sometimes with tomato seeds, it can create like a little bit of a mat of seed. And it's okay if this happens. You have it on the screen, you dry it out on the screen, and then you end up with like a mat of seeds. It just means you have to come in and massage the seed really well once it's dry to separate all the individual seeds. Because what you don't want is like five seeds stuck together going into the seed bank or into your packet. Ideally, you have all seeds that are individuated in the process. And yeah, so for me, I just come in every day and just move these around and massage them and play with them. And I will say one thing that I love about seed saving, which is also what I love about farming too, is just the tactile experience of getting to use our hands, putting our hands in the soil, obviously, but getting to use our hands in the processing of seeds. And that it's that I know I talked about this maybe on the first day of the course, but this ancestral connection that seed saving offers, particularly when we're doing it with these low tech methods that have been practiced for thousands of years. And here we get to come in and like put our energy into this seed, mix it around, move it around. Or if you're winnowing seed, same thing, that we're like really engaging with these plants in such a human way. And just connecting with the reciprocity that these plants offer us, just knowing that these seeds, I mean, just looking at this tray, this is like a tiny little lot of seeds. And I don't know how many seeds are on this tray, but maybe it could be 1,000 that are on there. And to think about like 1,000 tomato plants growing out there and how many seeds they're going to produce and tomatoes they're going to produce that are going to, feed people all over the islands, which is what's going to happen with the seed you guys send in. Like that seed's going to go out to people all over the islands, and that people are going to grow, and it's going to provide food that, really originated long before your garden, but that like we get to participate in that cycle of reciprocity. Next slide. And yeah, and so this is the seed sitting, on the left, it's like still wet seed that's on these trays. It's spread out. And then after some days, of sitting on here, which might be maybe like a week or so, we get to what's on the right, which is dry seed. I can like shake that thing from side to side, and that seed's just gonna like move around, and it's all individuated and pretty ready to go that I can, bag that up. Then we get into the storage, which is gonna come into I think I said our next class or two classes from now, we'll talk about that, or ready for me to send in to the seed bank. One thing from here just to note is when I do take it off the screen, I'm not going to put it in plastic because I haven't dried this down perfectly. And so if I put it in plastic, then I'm trapping a bunch of moisture inside that plastic. And so I'm more looking to put it in paper. It doesn't mean that if you're going to send this into the seed bank, and you're talking like the few days of transport or whatever, like go ahead, put it in plastic. It's not a big deal. But otherwise, if you're keeping it on the farm for a little bit, I tend to go more towards paper. Um, until I send it into the seed bank or pass it on, or dry it down even further so that I can comfortably put it in glass or plastic and then into the fridge for longer term storage. And that might be it, but next slide, we'll see. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so just a note on roguing because we're going to starting getting into that. And the next class, we will talk a lot about this. But even over the next couple weeks, some of you might start having tomatoes. I'm not necessarily going to speak for all of the crops we have going, but at least for the tomatoes, I kind of mentioned that we're looking for, I'm looking for, I can't speak for you, but I'm looking for longevity out of my tomato plants, which is I want the ones that are going to be producing 6 months later. And so I'm generally not going to save seeds from the first fruits that come. And that might be good news to you because then you get to eat the first fruits that come, which is more exciting. And so you can kind of select for the ones that, maybe after like a few clusters of tomatoes ripen, or more than that, that you can start harvesting for seed saving. And just, yeah, really noticing, this is a slide that we looked at a few weeks ago, but yeah, but just with roguing, save seed from earlier harvest and late harvest. So throughout the life cycle of the plant. And large red, healthy looking tomatoes, large red, like the name implies. And so you're looking for your biggest, best tomatoes. Maybe, unless you really like a small cherry that you can just throw in your salad and, stick a fork in and pop in your mouth. So there are, you get to decide what you're selecting for. Really, like what are the traits that you enjoy and that you like. So select for that. Save for multiple clusters of fruit, not just like all from one cluster. So that's why, you want to wait a while until you have maybe, 8 to 10 clusters on a single plant that you can harvest from, and do that from, each plant. And then also tasting tomatoes from different plants. See if you notice any difference. Oh, this one's really sour. This one's really sweet. The soil was all treated the same. So in theory, it has the same climatic conditions. There should be a similar genetic expression, but oftentimes there can be differences. And so, yes, so just being in continual observation of your plants to see which ones that you might not want to save seed from, and which ones you do want to save seed from. And then also, individual tomatoes, like, oh, this one's cracked. Let's not save seed from a tomato that's cracked because it's encouraging that genetic. This one has a little bit of mold on it, or this one has a pest that bore a little hole into. And as I mentioned, taking those tomatoes off the vine when they're really ripe and letting them sit for a few days, and really selecting then the nice firm ones that survive well. And I'm seeing a question, can you remind us which flowers to cut off? Just the first set of flowers, or keep pruning them off until the plants are a certain height? You don't need to cut off any flowers. And for me, I'm more pruning to lift the base of the plant off the ground and encourage its strength, get a nice solid trunk, and a healthy root system before I allow reproduction. So for me, it's that couple feet off the ground is what I'm, pruning off the leaves, but also pruning off the flowers from the lower part. And if you're super excited, like you're just so excited to get tomatoes and you leave a cluster of flowers on below that couple feet, that's okay too. All right. Yeah, thank you all so much. And I just happened to have seen that question, but I haven't seen the questions that came into the chat. But
There
it,
are a couple more. One was, is it also okay to put the seed straight from the tomato onto a paper towel and pop the gelatinous pouch and let it air dry?
pop the gelatinous pouch onto a paper towel. Is that what I'm understanding?
Uh, I'm thinking they're asking, why do we need to let it ferment?
Uh,
Would it work fine to just kind of try and get the gelatinous bit off of it and let it air dry?
um, it depends, and maybe, I guess, is the answer. The purpose in cleaning all of this seed is to separate the seed from any of the other organic matter that's inside the fruit, because that organic matter mixed with the seed will increase the chances that the seed itself can mold. And so if you were to do this directly onto a paper towel, let's say, what's likely is that that gelatinous substance is just going to dry around the seed and become a part of the seed. Will that seed still be viable? Yes, it'll still be viable. Will it have the same longevity? Probably not, as seed that was fermented and clean. It's a simple step. It's an easy step. It doesn't take much time to do this. So I don't see a reason why not. And then another note just on the paper towel concept, because oftentimes I see this in seed videos or tutorials online. They talk about drying seed on a paper towel. I've tried drying seed on a paper towel, and what inevitably happens is that there is paper towel on the seed, indefinitely because it sticks to the paper towel and it doesn't separate easily. So I very much prefer screens because it'll break off of the screen. But when it's on the paper towel and it's drying on there and it becomes one with the seed. So I don't recommend the paper towel route for drying. So hopefully that answers it. But yeah, I don't recommend it, and definitely not for, if it's your own home consumption, you can do it. You'll get viable seeds. But if it's for, sending into seed bank, seed network, or really having some good longevity out of the seed, I don't recommend it.
Great. Thank you. That's a good explanation. I know sometimes folks might use coffee filters, but that might still have some of the same issues of the fibers drying onto the seed. Uh, can you make your own seed drying racks, or are there any recommended places to purchase?
We did include some links, which are probably in a folder, but the ones I have, I believe, came from High Mowing Seeds. Maybe Breton, you can verify that. Is that true? The High Mowing has them.
Yeah, that is true. High Moline has them. I think there's like Southern Seed might even sell the
Oh, yeah.
screens, and I
Southern
mean,
Exposure.
yeah, it has Southern Exposure. And then, for those of you that maybe want to stay even more local, even just getting like a good stainless steel window screen that can be available locally at like Ace. You might be able to find that, and um you just wouldn't necessarily have the different sizing. But as far as drying goes, if it's strictly for drying, then you could use locally, local product like that. Um, yeah.
And there are a couple different sizes of hardware cloth that you can get as well that you can make screens out of, that you can get at the local hardware store. And so that could be good for bean seeds as an example, and not as much for the lettuce and the Ethiopian kale. Oh yeah, strictly medicinals. That's where my seed the screens came from. Thank you, Wendy, for suggesting that one. Yeah, they're a bit pricey. But as Bertan mentioned, I think it is Southern Exposure and maybe High Mowing too will sell just the screens, which makes it a lot more economical because it's easy for them to ship the screens and then you can build out your own frames. But if you really are gonna get into saving a lot of different varieties of seeds, I will say that the screens save so much time for doing this work.
Great. Is it pretty much a good general practice to not store any seeds in plastic?
It's a great question, and one that I don't necessarily have a complete answer to, um, because I mean, and we'll get into more of this in the next class when we talk about storing seeds, or in 2 classes from now when we get into storing seeds. If it's well dried down, you're going to want plastic. You're going to want glass. You're going to want something that's not going to let moisture in because, as we've talked about in previous classes, we are 60 to 70% humidity in the air here in Hawaii. And so what that means is if you have a well-dried down seed is still going to have a 60% moisture content in it. And so if you can dry it down even further, then great, go with the plastic, go with the glass. And I do keep seeds in plastic, like in plastic containers, like my bean seeds. We save the provider bean seed for the marketplace, but we also do it for our own use on the farm, and that all goes into plastic containers. And because, yeah, if it's in paper, yeah, then it's just going to keep inviting more moisture in. But we'll get more into it in the next class or in 2 classes from now, and talk more about that concept and all the kind of deeper considerations that are involved in making that decision.
Great. Any other questions? I think the only other one in the chat was, is the screen the same size as window screen?
Not
Yeah, the
not so
screen in
much.
a colander. Sorry, Brittany, go on.
Oh yeah, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I was just gonna say the colander screen that you guys saw in Evan's demonstration in the video is probably real similar to a window screen. But when we're talking about the seeds, specifically the seed saving screens with um, strictly medicinals or high mowing seeds that you can buy. Those are different grades of seed screen that are different sizes specifically for actually getting the seed to drop through or the chaff to drop through. So if you are, really want to be serious about saving seed, like Evan was saying, and you want to have a variety of plants, it's a very worthwhile investment to get a set of various screen sizes in order to grade down your seed well and clean properly. Yeah.
And we do have a set of different size screens available at local extension offices. On the Big Island, we have a set in Kona and a set at Komohana, and I think the other offices have them at their central extension office available to use at the office or potentially to borrow if you would need.
And one thing it's important to remember is this is community activism and community work, and it's really fun to bring people onto your farm and bring people into your garden and process seed together to do this work together. And so with having this, whether you have the screens or not, but with having the screens and you have a lot of screens, then like people can try it out and do different things. And generally people are going to be really excited to come and do this work with you and support. And so if you are when you do get to that point of processing the seed from these crops, just keep that in mind. Maybe you want to do a mini workshop and invite some friends over, invite your community over, or people that you exchange garden information with, and share with them your process, and then also process the seed with them.
Yes, it's a great educational activity for kids to get involved with. And you could set up a table at a farmer's market or something, and it's a good way to get people interested in it. And then, yeah, the hands-on experience of actually doing it can be really rewarding. Any other questions for Evan about the wet seed processing? Okay, I think we can, if we don't have any further questions for Evan today, we can close out early. Just a reminder, we've been doing our best to enter people's questions and the responses from the seed saving team into our Q&A document. And I'm just going to put that in the chat. If you do have questions that crop up in between sessions, you can go ahead and throw them in there and we'll do our best to address them at the next session. Otherwise, please do give us some updates by posting photos on the Padlet. That's always super helpful. And otherwise, is there anything else Berton or Evan or Nancy you would like to add at the end of today? Something maybe. Oh, we do have a question. My tomatoes probably have bacterial wilt. Am I just out of luck?
I'll take that one because we have that situation pretty severely at our Hilo site at Alai, and yeah, we're kind of out of luck. It's a soil borne. It's in the soil. We've tried a number of varieties. Sometimes you get lucky, and of 10 or 15 or 30 plants, we'll get one or two that will go and fruit. But we've moved them around the farm quite a bit. You could try different locations on your site, but if you do have bacterial wilt in your soil, yeah, it's pretty difficult. And we had Russell Nagata out. I had him out like last year, and we were talking about it. And yeah, he just said, "Oh, try something else." But I'm not totally giving up. I'm still trying different things and such. But don't get discouraged. It's that's just my take on it. We've been trying some other varieties, and even yeah, without so much luck. But any thoughts, Nancy, Evan, on bacterial wilt?
I think you could, if you weren't growing a lot of tomatoes, you could just put them in pots and you could make up your own potting mix.
No, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the longevity is of it on in the soil. I wonder if Russell addressed that.
Yeah, he said it was actually kind of came around from the ginger days, and so ginger was grown there. We're talking decades ago.
Mhm.
So it's
Wow.
yeah, and we've been cover cropping. It was fallow. It's yeah, it's a difficult
Yeah.
hurdle. Um, so yeah, I think that's a great one, Nancy, is to put it in pots. I think that's actually what ginger farmers started doing. And some of the Olena and turmeric farmers that I know that started getting, they actually moved their operations out of the soil into large screen house or shade house operations. Um, I do see this question in here in regard to dealing with pickle worms, growing zucchini. Um, yeah, we pretty much exclusively just grow in screen houses for dealing with the pickle worm at a larger scale. So, at scale, we use a 20 mesh netting, um, where it won't keep out thrips and smaller insects, but it also won't require ventilation or fans in the enclosed space. So you can get that material right here in Kea'au, Rudy's Shade, and that's shipped also, inner island. If you're looking at growing zucchinis commercially, you will need to get parthenocarpic varieties if you choose to do that. Otherwise, you'd need to be hand pollinating because you wouldn't have pollinators in your screen house. But that is how we deal with the pickle worm um, in our situation. My old farm up in Waimea, Scott Cathy, who's growing quite a bit of zucchini, he actually just moves his plot around quite a bit and just tries to like beat the pickle worm and has pretty good success with that. So if you're in maybe a cooler region and you have a lot of land available, you could potentially beat the pickle worm. But if you're growing in the same location regularly, um, we 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 use a screen house with a 20 mesh net.
So as I remember, the pickleworm is a night moth, isn't it?
I believe so.
I think it is. So what Ellen Sugawara does on Maui is she puts a 5-gallon bucket full of soapy water next to the plant, and she hangs um, a light above it, like a flashlight that attracts them to it, and they fall into the water. So she kind of goes after those. She said she has had, but it's definitely a difficult one.
Yeah.
Nellie was asking Baton about the like what bacterial wilt looks like.
Uh, oh, it looks terrible. It's one of the saddest things to see your plants doing. We're getting it on our eggplants now as well at Go Farm Adelai pretty severely. Um, yeah, basically it's like a curling. It's a little different. It's like a curling and then almost a blackening. So the entire plant will wilt at uniformly. That's what I've seen. It's like a uniformly wilting. It's different than like a leaf curl where it's like the leaves are curling but the plant's still growing. With the wilt, in my experience, it's like the entire plant just wilts and then starts to turn black and completely stops growing. Yeah, and yeah, it's it's sad. It's a sad looking plant. Um, Compared to even like a leaf curl. At certain times I originally mistook it for like, oh, am I getting a leaf curl? But the leaf curl, having had that before, the plant, it will kind of keep growing and you can kind of pick it off and mitigate a little bit. But with the bacterial wilt, the plant, uh, it's kind of throughout the entire plant and it dies pretty quickly. It'll die. And what I was told is to remove them, um, not necessarily put them in your compost. Really, you want to get them, maybe take them to green waste or burn them. Um, burn them is probably the best. So you're not putting it in green waste and spreading it. I don't like to do that. I really don't like taking diseases to green waste. I much prefer to try to burn it, dry it, and burn it, just to contain it. And then, if you have a couple that make it, maybe you're starting to see some resistance. So that's kind of where it's at. And that's where we've landed at a lie. Yeah, with the wilt. And now we're seeing it on the eggplant, which is again discouraging. Yeah.
I know that Elaine Ingham, who does a lot of the soil remediation, and she goes down to South America and she works with large banana plantations that have really a lot of different serious diseases. She has had really good luck over a long period of time with compost teas, just mixing up really huge quantities of it, putting it in giant sprayers, and just spraying the soil regularly over a long period of time. Seems like, yeah, because here what we have the black spot fungus that came in on some papaya, and I'm really having a hard time getting rid of that. So I'm trying that this year. I'm gonna try spraying the soil with the biodynamic preparation of the barrel compost, like it maybe quarterly, and just see if I can't move that somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is actually probably the best bet, as you really just want to try to change the dynamics in the soil, because it is a soil based, and um, disease. So I think that's probably the best bet. I did see there was a question as far as a parthenocarpic variety of zucchinis, and I just typed it in, but the first one that came up was a variety from Johnny's called Maverick. Um, so there are parthenocarpic zucchinis out there if you folks are interested for tunnel culture. Um, yeah, but getting back to what Nancy said, yeah, I think that if you want to battle bacterial wilt, you really, got to start making changes in your soil. And yeah, I think, biodynamic or preparations are probably going to be really, compost teas are going to be a good bet to mitigate that.
So Nellie was also asking about hydrogen peroxide on the bacterial wilt. Never
I
really used
haven't,
hydrogen peroxide.
yeah, I
Well,
haven't. Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, well,
Yeah, go ahead now.
my thought process is that the just a little dilution of hydrogen peroxide and doing a root drench will add more will oxygenate the soil. And so oxygen will kill the bacteria and maybe like fluff it up. I don't know. That was just
Give it
my
a
thought process.
try.
That
If
was
it
my
works,
thought process.
please let me know. I tried a number of things. I haven't tried that, but it makes me want to try it because I'd love a solution. Because it's
Oxygen.
a real tough one. Yeah, it's a tough one when you have it. Yeah, it almost deletes it can almost delete the crop, where like we're kind of choosing not to grow it. We really shifted like this year in our cohort, we shifted all to poha berries. So which is nice too. Like we're growing all poha berries and they're doing great, and we're just not dealing with bacterial wilt and kind of, we're just kind of shifting with our soil in that way. But yeah, and keep trying to experiment in finding solutions. Yeah. But that's a good one. I'll give that a try on our eggplants because all the students have eggplants in the field, and 60% of them are wilting out right now. And we haven't seen that before. We've actually had pretty good luck with our eggplants, but yeah, it's popping up pretty strong right now.
Another interesting thing to try, I think, is to, like, if you make compost, to take some of the compost that you make and put it in a mesh bag, like those bags that are sold at paint stores to strain paint. They're
Yeah.
very fine, right? Tie the top and put it in a 5-gallon bucket of water, and then there's a little bubbler that the guys use when they go fishing, on the shoreline. They just put it, they're run by a simple battery. They're very inexpensive, and that bubbler can go in the side there and bubble that compost in the water for 24 hours or 48 hours, and then try that as a drench. I mean, sometimes that can be pretty powerful.
We have a few questions in the chat, just general questions. How often to use diatomaceous earth?
Yeah, I think that depends on your growing. We don't typically use it as a soil amendment so much just because it's a little bit difficult to work with. Um, However, for growing zucchinis, I kind of got turned on to it many years ago as a zucchini grower. Because of its high silica content, it actually creates a really strong stem. So I was turned on to it that way for zucchini growing in particular. Um, and I just used it as an amendment, maybe like a tomato can every, 4 or 5 feet down the middle of a row. Um, yeah, as a soil amendment to be adding silica. So I think it's like per, as you depending upon your crop and what you're targeting, how to use it and how much you want to use it, because it is a little bit of a difficult product to apply because it's so powdery and you want to be careful with it with the silica, but it is a great product, I would say, in certain aspects. Evan, Nancy, you guys use diatomaceous earth much?
I don't
But
so
I'd
much.
like to.
Yeah.
I'd like to try it. I
Yeah, there was
found
an
it
old
in a bag today in my garden shed. I didn't even know I had it. I forgot. So yeah, I guess it's time for me to try a little bit.
Yeah, I learned about it because it was actually an article I'd read in Acres a lot of years ago, and they had a lot of success specifically for zucchini and squash growing for strong stems. Because the stems, in high wind, if you've grown zucchini or squash, they really can struggle in a windy condition. Um, so yeah, that's my experience with the diatomaceous earth. We do use it with the animals quite a bit. With our barnyards and stuff, we do put it down in the barnyard, in combination with like a lactose bacillus, um, for, bug or pest prevention.
How often would you need to use it, do you think? I mean, it would stay around. It seems like a long time.
Yeah, like we would just like pre-plant, just like an amendment, like adding fertilizer. So pre-plant, in a pre-plant application, just maybe on a 100-foot bed that would be a single row, let's say 100-foot bed of zucchini. You're planting, 2 foot, maybe, yeah, 2 foot on center, maybe 3 foot on center, depending upon your variety. So, maybe 6 or 7 pounds per 100 feet. Oh, not a big application, but putting it down. If you do have low silica in your soil as it is, or you're seeing you have a high wind situation, you want to kind of up that silica and up that plant strength. In the stem, maybe you could do, if you want to be voracious and put 10 pounds per bed, but six, minor application, it'll stick around. But I did it with each crop. So I'd go back and put it down again if we were replanting as like a pre-plant application. Yeah.
Wendy was asking about green natural farming, which is a whole nother very interesting set of procedures to work with the soil to improve the soil, to balance the soil. Master Cho, who just passed away recently, he was here on Hawaii Island 3 different times, giving courses, and just even trying to make the IMO, just the really basic IMO with the natural with the Korean natural farming technique is a really interesting thing to do. To bring in the natural microorganisms that are in your area, in the air, in the soil, and grow them on. I did it in a wooden box with just white rice, and then I added that to the coffee cherry, not the silver skins of the coffee, and made this kind of preparation that was very interesting. So there's so much to experiment with out there, and it's all really, really good. Have you, Evan, do you use any Korean natural farming?
I've used some sprays over time that other people have made. I did learn to make a bunch of them just in a workshop, and I mean it's rad. I highly recommend it. The people that utilize it regularly love it, and there's a lot of not necessarily like large scale commercial growers, but a lot of homestead farmers that are strictly using Korean natural farming amendments for their fertilization and pest control program on the farm that I know and who are seeing great results. And for myself as a commercial farmer, it's like a whole nother process to jump into to maintain all these liquids and to create them and then to spray them regularly that I just haven't invested the energy into at this point. But yeah, I would like everything in farming, there's a million best practices out there, and I recommend doing the ones you're inspired to do. And because there's a lot of great practices to do, and that I would say is definitely one of them. And so if you're inspired on it, there are a lot of workshops on Korean natural farming happening throughout Hawaii because there's a lot of practitioners.
And there's some good books.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And just recipes. You can just get recipes.
Hmm. Yep.
Diane is asking Nancy, how do you make your compost?
I use a very, very simple method. I um I just pile it up, and I use a wire around the outside of it. That's the what do they call that? It's concrete wire that I buy at Lowe's, and I make a big round of it or an oval shape because the chickens get into it and then they just tear it up and they just put it everywhere. So I put all the dry brown carbonaceous material in there, and then I put all my kitchen waste in there. And the only thing that I really don't put in there is wood. I try to keep the woody stems. If they're small, that's fine, but if they get bigger, they're just not going to compost because usually compost only takes about 3 months, 3 to 4 months, and it's finished, and then you can sift it and use it in the garden. So I try to just, keep the greens and the browns and not too much not too much kitchen waste without having a lot of the brown carbonaceous material with it too. And then here, like we in Kona, we're just entering our rainy season. You have to kind of watch things because the compost pile can get too wet in a rainy season. So when it's wet enough, I'll just cover the top of it with a piece of black plastic and then just open the plastic to put things in it and close it back up. Or if it's a super dry season, you really have to watch your compost because if it gets too dry, then all the action, the biological action inside just stops. So it's so simple. It's one of the simplest things. It doesn't, you don't have to use an exact recipe. That's what I've discovered over the last 50 years.
Yeah, that's well said. People really want to overcomplicate compost. Yeah, it's simple. Yeah.
I mean, the biodynamic farmers say if you sprinkle a light, like every now and then, if you sprinkle a light dressing of wood ash on the top of it, just every now and then. It helps keep the nitrogen in the pile. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would say it reminds me of Sun Hadley, who
Mm.
I know those in the Seed Network know Sun, but was a seed saver and farmer. Years on Maui, years on Kauai, Big Island, and he just talked about just growing food with compost. And there's all this like scientific, complicated information out there about growing food and like the chemistry needed to have the right set of nutrients to grow crops. And what I learned from Sun is just this power to just like transcend the science. And he's like, just make compost on the farm, simple compost on the farm, and that's like all you need to feed your plants, and they're gonna do well. And just that, yeah, just that level of simplicity, like bringing it back to that basics of like that's all nature does, is it like composts materials on the floor of a forest that grows the next generation.
However,
Yeah.
even though it's so simple, and I really do, it is simple, and I hope everyone is by the end of this year is making a compost pile or at least starting their first one, is that I have a friend who has many horses, and she mucks out those stalls a lot. And she uses different, sometimes she uses hay in the stall, sometimes she uses the coffee parchment in the stalls. And so she adds some of that to her compost. And I must say that the health of her gardens is there is a vibrancy there that I don't have in my gardens because I'm not using any manures. And I'm really going to start doing something. I mean, maybe I could even add some composted organic chicken manure to my compost pile, or have some of my compost piles have manure, a little bit of manure in it and some just not, just to see what the difference is in those two. But there definitely is a difference. What do you think, Bertan?
Absolutely. And I know Son always used to have a big pile of chicken manure on his farms too.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm glad you brought Son into the conversation, Evan. Great grower for, for Hawaii. Um, yeah, and I've done both too. We don't keep livestock at Go Farm at Ally, and yet I've been a livestock keeper for a couple decades at Milk and Honey, and the compost difference is significant. What you can do with manure added to compost. So, if you do keep chickens or, horses or whatever livestock you keep, it like what I like to share is like it kind of goes back to these old covenants that people have with animals and then, the land is that, it's really hard to have a closed loop system without animals involved. It's very difficult. They provide a great deal of nutrients and protein for us. They're very efficient in their work in that way. So, for those of you who, have enough land to, even keeping a few chickens it's a huge resource to be able to add that to your compost in your recipe or to compost it separately. Maybe you compost it all separately. You separate, this is my vegetable compost and you know, this is strictly my animal compost. That's a fine way to do it too. But then when it comes to getting in your garden, you can blend those or use them appropriately or as needed. But yeah, animal the animal manures are a key component, to a good fertility program. And they're, like Nancy said, it's a certain vibrancy that comes with that. They're for eons and eons, that's how we've, kind of cultivated our lands in an agrarian way with animal use, not just plowing the fields, but fertilizing them as well.
And as far as this question about compost tea recipes, use anything. Try it with vermicast, try it with compost, put it in a little bag, put it in your water, bubble it for 24 hours, and just try it. You know, that makes a really nice light fertilizer for, let's say, starts in the nursery that maybe you didn't add any compost at all to your potting mix. You might just water with like a light compost tea in when they're little and young, because they don't really need any kind of heavy fertilizers at you know, at that point. That's a nice thing to do with your young plants in the nursery. Yeah, use your intuition. Right on, Nellie. I think that's it. Oh, there was a question in the Padlet. Some folks were asking about the dry cards, Marielle. How can we?
So, sorry, I have not been able to confirm this yet, but I believe that when we ordered all the screens for all the extension offices, we also got dry cards for each of them. So I don't know how many, but I can check into that and get back to you. And if we do indeed have them, we could see about if we can distribute them. They came from, I think, UC Davis.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You have
or,
to, so if that might be something worth exploring, if everybody who is in this cohort would like a dry card, we might want to reach out to them and see if we can order some.
okay. And that'll
So
go segue well with the next class too. With,
Okay.
here's
yeah.
a link to the page at UC Davis. So they talk about how to sign up and potentially get them.
Yeah, so we'll look into that and then we'll have all that information for you in the next class.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And thanks for your patience with the issues with the link. We'll try and sort that out for the next class. But if you do encounter it in the future, try going back and using an older link, or the password is always seed.
The link on
Always.
the syllabus in Google Drive, right at the top of the syllabus, is the link for tonight, and will always be the link.
Great.
Thank you, Marielle. Thank you,
Yep.
Evan.
Thank you all.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you. I want to learn how to make those movies. I'll ask you.
Okay.
There's this thing called an iPhone. It's
I
amazing
know, but I don't
what it
have an
can do.
iPhone.
Ah.
Oh
But
yeah, maybe.
but I have an iPad. That probably will do it.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Okay.
Just hit record.
I know, but okay. I have questions, but I'll ask you later.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
All
Mandela.
right.
Okay.